The grand hall of the Zephyrian diplomatic vessel gleamed with bioluminescent panels that pulsed in rhythmic waves, casting an ethereal glow across the assembled delegates. Louis Chen stood among the human contingent, his posture relaxed despite the weight of a dozen alien gazes upon him. He had been to enough of these first contact ceremonies to know that patience was humanity's greatest weapon. Princess Velshara of the Zephyrian Accord swept into the chamber, her crystalline exoskeleton refracting light into 1,000 dancing colors. She was young by her species' standards, barely into her 3rd century, and her movements carried the sharp confidence of someone who had never been told no. Behind her trailed a dozen courtiers, their own shells dimmer, marking their lower status in the rigid Zephyrian hierarchy. Orla Martinez, the human diplomatic attaché, stood beside Louis and whispered through her neural link, "Remember, she's considered a prodigy among her people. Unified 3 colony worlds by her 2nd century." Louis nodded almost imperceptibly. He had read the briefings. The Zephyrians were an old species, their civilization spanning millennia when humans were still discovering fire. They measured worth in age, in accumulated knowledge, in the complex lattice of social hierarchies that governed every interaction. To them, humanity was an infant species, clever perhaps, but fundamentally immature. The princess approached the human delegation, and the room fell silent save for the harmonic hum of the ship's systems. Her compound eyes, hundreds of faceted lenses that could perceive wavelengths humans couldn't even imagine, fixed on Louis. "So," her voice emerged from a translator device, smooth and melodious, "Earth sends children to negotiate with the stars." She gestured with one of her forearms, the movement elegant and dismissive. "Your species has existed for what? A few 100,000 years? We have histories older than your oldest bones." The Zephyrian courtiers chittered in what the translator rendered as polite laughter. Several alien delegates from other species shifted uncomfortably. This was a breach of protocol even by Zephyrian standards. Orla's jaw tightened, but Louis remained still, his expression unchanged. "Your colony on Kepler 442b?" the princess continued, circling the human delegation like a predator. "We observed your terraforming efforts. Crude, inefficient, like watching a child stack blocks and call it architecture." She paused in front of Louis, tilting her head in a gesture that conveyed superiority across a dozen species. "Tell me, little human, what wisdom can your brief mayfly existence possibly offer to beings who have walked the stars since before your son was born?" The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ship's hum seemed to fade. This was more than rudeness. It was a calculated insult. A test, perhaps, or simply the arrogance of youth combined with the weight of an ancient civilization. Every eye in the chamber turned to Louis. The other human delegates looked ready to respond, to defend, to argue. Orla's hand moved toward her communication device. Louis simply looked at Princess Velshara for a long moment. His eyes, brown and unremarkable by human standards, met her compound gaze steadily. Then, without a word, he turned and began walking toward the exit. "Where?" the princess started, her translator crackling with surprise. Louis didn't pause, didn't look back. He walked with the same calm stride he had entered with, his footsteps echoing in the suddenly silent hall. Orla hesitated for only a second before following him, and then the rest of the human delegation moved as one, filing out behind their colleague. The Zephyrian princess stood frozen, her crystalline form catching the light in ways that now seemed less magnificent and more fragile. Her courtiers chittered nervously, unsure how to interpret what had just occurred. Ambassador Catherine of the Valorian Collective, a species known for their neutrality and wisdom, approached the princess slowly. His tri-horned head lowered in what might have been disappointment. "Your Highness," Catherine's deep voice rumbled, "do you know what you have just witnessed?" "A human's cowardice?" Velshara replied, but her voice carried a note of uncertainty. "No," Catherine said quietly. "You have witnessed something we elder species often forget. The humans have a saying, 'Don't wrestle with pigs. You both get dirty and the pig likes it.' That human refused to engage with your insults not because he lacked the ability to respond, but because he recognized that your words required no response." The ambassador gestured toward the empty doorway. "The Zephyrians measure worth in years. The Valorians measure it in wisdom. The Takarans measure it in conquest. But humans measure worth in actions and results in what you do rather than what you claim to be." He paused, letting the words sink in. That human walked away because your opinion, Princess, simply did not matter to him. And in doing so, he demonstrated more diplomatic sophistication than you with all your centuries. Velshara's exoskeleton dimmed, the colors no longer dancing but muted, subdued. For the first time in her 3 centuries, she felt the cold touch of genuine embarrassment. 3 hours later, Lewis sat in the human delegation's quarters, reviewing planetary survey data with Orla when the communication panel chimed. On the screen appeared Princess Velshara, alone without her courtiers or the trappings of her position. "Mr. Chen," she began, and this time her translator carried a different tone, something softer, more genuine. I spoke in haste and arrogance. Ambassador Kithran helped me understand that age does not grant wisdom automatically. Sometimes it merely grants the opportunity to make more sophisticated mistakes. Lewis leaned back in his chair, considering. "We have a saying, Princess. Don't let the old fool you just because they have gray hair. Respect is earned through actions, not demanded through ancestry." "I see that now," Velshara admitted. "You're terraforming on Kepler 442b. I called it crude, but I reviewed the data more carefully. You achieved in decades what would take my people centuries, and with a fraction of the resources. Not because of better technology, but because your species approaches problem differently." "We're young," Lewis said with a slight smile. "We make mistakes fast, learn fast, and adapt fast. It's not better or worse than your way, Princess. It's just different." For a moment, the young princess was quiet. Then she said, Would you consider returning to the negotiations tomorrow? I promise a more respectful discourse." Lewis glanced at Orla, who nodded slightly. "We'll be there, Princess. After all, that's why we came, to build bridges, not walls." As the communication ended, Orla turned to Lewis with a grin. "You know half the diplomatic corps is calling you crazy for walking out like that?" Lewis shrugged. "Maybe, but sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to play a game you can't win." The princess wanted a fight, a defense, something she could tear apart with her centuries of accumulated knowledge. By walking away, I didn't give her that satisfaction. "Humanity, fuck yeah," Orla said with a laugh. "Humanity, fuck yeah," Lewis agreed. "We might be the youngest species in the galaxy, but we've learned one thing very well. Dignity isn't about winning every argument. Sometimes it's about knowing which battles aren't worth fighting." Outside the viewport, the stars wheeled in their ancient dance, indifferent to the dramas of the species that traversed the spaces between them. But in one small corner of that vast darkness, a young species had taught an old one a lesson about wisdom, not through superior knowledge or advanced technology, but through the simple, profound act of walking away.